The royal court of Eldrath was a place where whispers carried weight heavier than swords. Its high, shadowed arches and black marble floors reflected candlelight like a river of fire, flickering across the cold faces of nobles and warriors alike. Today, tension thrummed through the hall like a living creature. At the center of it all, Kalen, the savage alpha, stood like a mountain of muscle and raw power, his dark eyes scanning the room with a predator's precision. Every step he took made the courtiers tremble, not with fear alone, but with awe. He was feared across the kingdom, a man whose name could silence arguments and whose wrath could topple alliances. Legends whispered of his brutal justice, his merciless hand, and the strength of a man who never yielded. But behind that facade of savagery, few knew the lonely fire that burned within him. And then, in the middle of the court, she appeared, Omega Leora, quiet, graceful, yet with a presence that seemed to defy the weight of the world. She moved with a calm elegance, yet every motion held an unspoken strength. Nobles whispered of her gentle nature, her keen intelligence, and the strange serenity that seemed to follow her. Where others saw a delicate woman, Kalen felt something he could not name stirred deep in his chest, a pull that made his instincts fight their usual restraint. The tension came to a sudden boil when two noble factions began shouting across the floor, their voices sharp as swords. Accusations flew like daggers, and the court erupted in chaos. Kalen's hand instinctively went to his belt, his claws flexing. His eyes darted to the source of the disturbance, and there she was, standing directly between the warring nobles. "Step aside," Kalen's voice thundered, low and dangerous. The crowd froze. Even the most defiant of nobles faltered under his gaze. But Leora did not move. She raised her chin, her eyes steady. "I will not let this court fall into bloodshed for your pride," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. It was a simple sentence, yet Kalen felt as if it struck at something deep within him. The alpha's temper flared like wildfire. The heat in his veins surged, and without thinking he crossed the floor in 3 long, powerful strides. Before anyone could react, his hand shot out, closing around her throat. The court gasped, nobles screaming for him to release her. Leora's eyes widened, but she did not scream. She met his gaze, and for a single heartbeat the world seemed to hold its breath. Kalen's dark eyes locked with hers, and something in that silent exchange shook him more than any sword or shield ever could. His grip, though fierce, faltered. Not from weakness, but from confusion, a storm of instinct and emotion that he could not name. "Alpha Kalen," someone whispered, though it was almost lost under the gasps. Leora's hands rose slowly, trembling, but not in fear. They hovered near his arm, as if reaching for the calm she somehow knew lay beneath his fury. Kalen felt a strange heat in his chest, an unfamiliar ache that made him release her. She stumbled back, gasping for air, her fingers brushing the cold marble floor. The court erupted in chaos, some shouting in relief, others in outrage. Kalen, however, was frozen, staring at her with a mixture of wonder and unease. The pull between them was undeniable, a magnetic force neither of them could name, and in that moment both of their fates began to shift in ways neither could foresee. Leora took a trembling step forward, placing a hand against her chest. I'm unharmed," she said softly, though her voice betrayed a flicker of awe. The court murmured in disbelief. Few had ever survived Kalen's fury unscathed. Kalen's dark eyes followed her every motion. There was a quiet strength in her, a calm courage that defied his savage reputation. The Alpha had crushed many before her, yet he felt as if he had touched something he could not fight. His fingers ached from the contact, but not in the way they normally would. This pain was different. It was sharp, confusing, and oddly compelling. "Why are you different?" he muttered to himself, almost inaudible. Yet it carried the weight of a question that had no simple answer. Leora met his gaze unafraid, though her heart raced. For a few moments neither spoke. The hall's noise faded into a distant hum, and it was only the sound of their breathing that seemed to exist in the space between them. It was a silence charged with something primal and ancient, a connection neither understood but both sensed with startling clarity. Kalen finally stepped back, his massive frame blocking the light as he moved. The court sighed in relief, though the tension had not fully left the room. Leora straightened herself, brushing the edges of her gown. Her eyes did not waver from Kalen's, and the faintest flicker of recognition passed between them. Something in her soul seemed to call to him, and he could not shake the feeling that she was not just another courtier, but someone destined to be at the center of his life. Yet neither could voice the truth. Kalen's mind raced with the conflicting emotions of duty, instinct and the inexplicable longing he had never known. Leora, for her part, felt a pull toward him that terrified her, though she could not explain why. The court's eyes burned into them, demanding explanations, but the two stood locked in a silent understanding that transcended words. As the nobles whispered among themselves, Kalen finally broke the silence. "You are not like the others," he said, his voice low, a rumble that seemed to shake the very stones of the hall. Leora's breath caught, and she nodded almost imperceptibly. The rest of the court tried to continue with their debates, but the moment had shifted the balance of power. Even the most ambitious nobles felt the weight of the savage alpha's restraint, and the unspoken bond forming before their eyes. Whispers spread that Kalen had not struck her fully, that perhaps this Omega had survived the alpha's fury because of something greater, something that even Kalen could not understand. Kalen's gaze lingered on her as she was escorted to her seat by aides, her posture poised despite the tremor in her hands. He could not look away. He could not shake the pull in his chest, the storm of emotion that had been awakened by her very presence. The hall seemed smaller, the flames of the chandeliers flickering as if they too recognized the significance of the moment. When the court finally resumed its business, Kalen remained rooted, eyes locked on Leora. The nobles debated treaties, alliances, and justice, but Kalen's thoughts were elsewhere. He saw her not as a pawn, not as a noble, not even as a woman, but as a force that had reached him where no one else had dared. And in that quiet, invisible bond, a seed of fate took root. The savage alpha, feared and ruthless, had been touched by a force older than any crown, stronger than any army. The Omega, unaware of the destiny that intertwined with his, had survived an encounter that should have broken her, yet only made the pull between them stronger. As the court session ended and nobles began to depart, Kalen did something no one expected. He turned away from the discussions of power and intrigue and followed, silent and deliberate, keeping his distance but never losing sight of her. Leora, sensing the shadow of his presence, did not turn, though her heart beat faster with a mixture of fear and curiosity. When she reached the exit of the court, she paused, feeling the weight of his gaze. Kalen stopped several steps behind her, silent, a dark storm contained within his towering form. The world beyond the hall, the gardens, the night sky, the distant mountains seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them in a space carved out of fate itself. Kalen's voice finally broke the silence, low and almost reluctant. "You are mine," he said, not in possession but in recognition of something he could not yet name. The words hung in the night air, carrying a promise and a warning intertwined. Leora's breath caught, and she turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. Something flickered in her eyes, fear, yes, but also a strange, unexplainable longing. The court, the kingdom, even the stars above seemed distant. For a single heartbeat, it was just the Alpha and the Omega, bound by something unseen yet undeniable. Kalen stepped back into the shadows, letting her pass, but the pull remained, a thread between them that could not be broken by fear, distance, or even time. And as she disappeared into the night, he realized that the savage Alpha's greatest battle had just begun, not against his enemies, but against himself and the Omega who had unknowingly claimed his heart. The night swallowed her figure, but Kalen did not move. He remained in the moonlight, dark eyes searching the path she had taken, a storm of questions and emotions raging within him. Somewhere deep in his chest he knew that their story had only begun, and that the threads of fate had already woven their lives together in ways neither could yet understand. The first spark had ignited, and neither the court nor the kingdom nor even Kalen himself could predict what would come next. The night air outside the royal court was sharp and still, carrying the scent of distant pine forests and wet stone. Leora's steps echoed along the empty cobbled streets as she moved quickly, her cloak wrapped tightly around her. Though her heart raced, she forced herself to stay calm. The encounter in the court replayed in her mind. Kalen's fierce eyes, his powerful presence the moment his hand had closed around her throat. She had survived, yes, but a strange warmth lingered in that memory, leaving her unsettled. Her destination was the gardens that stretched behind the palace walls, a place few dared enter after dark. Lanterns flickered in the shadows, illuminating statues of long-forgotten kings and queens, their stone faces solemn and silent. Leora paused by a fountain, letting the sound of trickling water soothe her mind. She inhaled deeply, trying to push away the sudden realization. The savage alpha, the man feared by all, had looked at her differently. Not with anger, not with cruelty, but with something deeper, something she could not name. Meanwhile, Kaelin remained in the great hall, silent amid the echoes of departing nobles. He had released her, yet the image of her steady eyes haunted him. His hands ached, not from the grip he had placed on her, but from the pull of something he could not explain. The Alpha, known for his strength and fearlessness, had never felt so unsure, so aware of another soul in a way that both frightened and compelled him. For hours, Kaelin sat in the shadows of his chambers, replaying every moment of the court. Every detail of Leora's presence, her calm defiance, the soft determination in her voice, it all burned in his mind. He could not focus on the political matters that had filled the day, nor could he dismiss the strange sensation that had lodged itself deep within him. He was an alpha, a ruler of strength and dominance, yet she had penetrated the walls he had built around his heart. The following morning, the court resumed its business. The nobles whispered, casting sideways glances at Leora, murmuring about the encounter with the savage alpha. Rumors grew like wildfire. Some said she had survived by sheer luck, others that she possessed a rare courage, and a few even whispered of destiny. Leora remained calm, moving through the hall with grace and purpose, though her mind could not stop returning to Kaelin. She knew instinctively that their paths were entwined, though she did not understand how or why. Kaelin's eyes found her immediately, and the tension in the room shifted. When she passed him, the air seemed to tighten, as if the world itself had recognized their connection. The court, full of intrigue and whispers, faded into the background, leaving only the Alpha and the Omega in a space that neither could ignore. That evening, Leora returned to the palace gardens, seeking the solace of the moonlit paths. She did not expect to see Kaelin there, yet he was standing beneath an ancient oak, the silver light illuminating the sharp angles of his face. His eyes, dark and intense, followed her every step. "You come here often," Kaelin said, his voice low but not threatening. It was an observation, simple and direct, yet it carried weight. Leora paused, keeping a careful distance. "I find the gardens calming," she replied, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "They are a place of clarity." Kaelin nodded as though he understood more than she had said. "And yet you choose to walk them alone, knowing the dangers of the court," he remarked. There was no accusation in his tone, only curiosity. "I prefer to face danger with eyes open," Leora answered, her gaze unwavering. "Fear cannot guide my steps." For a moment they simply stared at each other, two forces quietly circling, drawn by a power neither could fully comprehend. Kaelin's instincts told him to reach out, to bridge the gap between them, yet caution held him back. He had ruled with strength, yet here was someone who stirred something far stronger than brute power, the awakening of his own heart. "Why did you not strike me fully yesterday?" Leora asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper, breaking the silence. The question hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Kaelin's jaw tightened. He did not answer immediately. The truth was dangerous and complicated. He had felt something forbidden yet undeniable. Something that told him she was not merely a subject to be feared or controlled. I cannot explain it," he admitted finally, his voice rough, edged with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. Leora's brow furrowed. "Then perhaps some things cannot be explained," she said softly, though her heart pounded with the knowledge that their connection was no ordinary thing. Days passed, and their paths continued to cross. The court was never far behind, but Kaelin and Leora found moments in the hidden corners of the palace. Libraries stacked with ancient tomes, secluded balconies overlooking the gardens, shadowed corridors where no one dared tread. Each encounter heightened the tension between them. Words were carefully chosen, glances were measured, yet the unspoken bond grew with every heartbeat. One night, as a storm rolled over the distant mountains, Kaelin found Leora in the library, her hands brushing over the spines of leather-bound books. The wind rattled the windows and the shadows danced across her face, highlighting the strength and determination in her features. "You read as if searching for answers," Kaelin remarked, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "I am," she said simply, turning to face him. "The court is a web of power and lies. Knowledge is my only shield." Kalen stepped closer, and though he remained calm, the air between them seemed charged. "And yet you are unafraid of me," he said, his gaze penetrating.
Why? Leora did not falter.
"Because fear is not the way to live," she replied, her eyes meeting his. Even in the presence of the savage alpha, the words struck him, a mix of admiration and disbelief. He had encountered courage before, but this was different. It was not reckless, nor was it naive. It was strength rooted in truth, in the ability to face danger without losing oneself. And it unnerved him in ways no battle ever could. That night, Kalen left the library restless. The wind outside mirrored the storm within him. He could not forget her, the way she had looked at him, unafraid, unwavering. The court demanded his attention, the nobles plotted, and yet his thoughts kept returning to the Omega who had survived him, who had not yielded, who had stirred something in him that he could not name. Meanwhile, Leora sat in her chambers, candlelight flickering against the walls. She could not shake the feeling that Kalen's presence was closer than the shadows suggested. It was a pull, subtle yet undeniable, a force that drew her thoughts to him despite every rational reason not to. Her heart beat faster, yet she refused to let fear guide her. There was a strange sense of destiny in their encounters, a feeling that their fates were already entwined even if she could not yet understand how. The next morning, the court erupted in tension once more. Rumors of Kalen's restraint toward Leora had spread like wildfire. Nobles whispered of fate, destiny, and impossible courage. Some spoke of old prophecies, tales of alphas and omegas bound by forces beyond human understanding. The court itself seemed to recognize the connection forming between the savage alpha and the omega, and unease rippled through its marble halls. Kalen observed Leora across the hall, his gaze sharp, aware of every movement. She moved with grace, her composure unshaken despite the court's scrutiny. Every step she took seemed to pull him closer to a truth he could not yet name. As the day drew to a close, Kalen approached the gardens once more, moving through the moonlight with the silent power of a predator and the unspoken restraint of a heart awakening to something it had never known. Leora was already there, standing near the fountain, the silver light of the moon reflecting in her eyes. "You return?" she said softly, though her voice carried a mix of relief and curiosity. "I had to see," he replied, his voice low, nearly a growl, though there was no anger in it. "I must know why you do not fear me." Leora looked down for a moment, then back at him. "Because I sense more in you than the court sees," she said, her voice steady. "I see the man beneath the savage alpha." Kalen felt something tighten in his chest, a mixture of longing, confusion, and awe. He could not answer with words. Instead, he stepped closer, careful not to overstep, yet drawn by an invisible force stronger than any restraint. "You are my fated mate," he whispered without fully understanding the truth of it. The words trembled on his lips, a confession and recognition all at once. Leora's eyes widened, and a shiver ran down her spine. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine and the distant rain. For a long moment neither spoke, their souls silently acknowledging the bond that had begun. The court, the kingdom, the dangers that lay ahead all seemed distant. But destiny does not wait. Somewhere deep in the shadows, unseen forces stirred, sensing the awakening of a bond long foretold. A storm was coming, not of wind and rain, but of power, emotion, and fate, and neither Kalen nor Leora could escape its pull. Cliffhanger. As they stood in the moonlit gardens, the air heavy with unspoken truths, a shadow passed along the edge of the trees, a silent watcher whose intentions were unknown. The fated bond had been acknowledged, yet danger approached, testing the strength of their connection before it could fully blossom. The sun rose over Eldrath like a pale sentinel, spilling gold and silver across the marble spires of the royal court. The streets were already alive with activity, but Leora felt the tension in the air more keenly than the bustle around her. Since the encounter in the moonlit gardens, she could not escape the thought of Kalen. His presence lingered in her mind, a shadowed force that pulled at her thoughts and heart. Yet the court waited, as it always did, impatient and sharp-tongued. Whispers followed her as she moved through the hallways, noble eyes glinting with suspicion and curiosity. Rumors of Kalen's restraint and her unbroken courage had spread, and now she walked under the scrutiny of 1,000 pairs of eyes. Kalen, however, was always aware of her. From the balcony of his private chambers, he watched her movements with careful intensity. His heart, long hardened by battles and burdens of leadership, thudded with a strange, restless rhythm whenever she was near. He had yet to fully admit to himself the depth of the pull between them. Fated mate or not, she stirred something in him that defied all reason, and it both frightened and thrilled him. The morning passed in tense routine, with nobles debating trade agreements and alliances, their voices polite but edged with hidden daggers. Leora tried to focus on the discussions, but every sound of Kaelin's voice or movement seemed to resonate through her mind. By midday, she found herself wandering again into the palace gardens, seeking the sanctuary that had become her refuge. The gardens were quieter than usual, bathed in the gentle warmth of the sun. The fountain sparkled and the shadows of the ancient oak trees stretched long and protective across the cobblestones. Leora's thoughts wandered to Kaelin, his dark eyes, the strength of his presence, and the unspoken bond that had formed between them. She did not fully understand it, yet she could feel its weight. She had not noticed the figure emerging from the shadows until it was almost too late. A hooded stranger, moving with silent grace, stepped from the trees. Before Leora could react, the stranger lunged, a dagger glinting in the sunlight. Instinct took over. Leora stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding the blade. The stranger's movements were precise, calculated, and deadly. Fear gripped her heart, but it was accompanied by a rush of determination. She could not fall here, not before she understood what was happening. Then, like a shadow breaking free, Kaelin appeared. The savage alpha's presence filled the garden, a living wall of power and intensity. With a roar that seemed to shake the air itself, he intercepted the attacker, slamming the dagger aside with one powerful strike. The assassin stumbled back, but Kaelin did not relent. His movements were fluid, precise, and terrifying in their speed. With a series of controlled blows, he disarmed the intruder and sent him sprawling to the cobblestones. The stranger scrambled to escape, but Kaelin's hand shot out, seizing the cloak and holding him firmly against the ground. Leora's breath came in ragged gasps. She had seen courage, but never like this. Never a force so raw, so protective, so utterly terrifying yet controlled. Kaelin's eyes, dark and intense, met hers for a fleeting moment. In them she saw not anger, but a fierce, unyielding need to protect her. "You are unharmed," Kaelin said to her, his voice low, almost rough with emotion. "Are you hurt?" "No," she replied, straightening herself, though her hands trembled slightly. "I can handle myself." Kaelin's gaze softened ever so slightly, though the tension in his muscles remained. "You should not be alone," he said. It was a statement, not a question. Leora felt the weight of his words, the underlying truth that her life was now bound to his whether she wanted it or not. The stranger, realizing escape was impossible, struggled weakly before going still. Kaelin's eyes narrowed, assessing the danger and its implications. The man was clearly skilled, trained, but unprepared for the raw power of the Alpha. Kaelin released him with a warning, one that promised consequences should he ever return. As the sun climbed higher, Leora and Kaelin stood together in the garden, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers. Neither spoke at first, but the silence between them was charged. A tension born not of fear, but of something deeper, connection, recognition, and the unspoken acknowledgement of the bond that had begun to form. "You protect me as if my life matters more than your own," Leora said finally, her voice soft, yet filled with meaning. "Why?" Kaelin's gaze darkened, but his voice was steady. "Because it does," he said simply. "And because you are mine." Leora's heart skipped a beat at the words. She did not fully understand the claim, yet she felt it resonating within her, a strange sense of rightness that defied explanation. She wanted to speak, to question, but the sight of him, the Alpha in his element, unflinching and unwavering, rendered her momentarily speechless. For the next few days, life in the court became a delicate dance. Leora moved carefully, aware of the danger that seemed to surround her, yet also drawn toward Kaelin with every passing hour. The savage Alpha, in turn, remained vigilant, watching over her, anticipating threats before they could reach her. Despite the protective barrier he placed around her, Kaelin found himself drawn to her presence in ways he had never experienced. Their encounters, brief and often silent, carried a weight that neither could ignore. In her gaze he saw understanding, courage, and an unspoken challenge. In his, she sensed strength, danger, and a growing warmth that both frightened and fascinated her. Then, one evening, a council meeting brought new threats to light. The court had received reports of a faction seeking to undermine Kaelin's authority, exploiting the distraction of the recent attack on Leora. Nobles whispered of rebellion, of plots against the Alpha, and of forces that would not hesitate to strike at weakness. Kaelin's eyes narrowed as he absorbed the reports. His jaw tightened, his muscles coiling like springs ready to strike. Leora, standing beside him, felt the storm within him ripple outward, a wave of power that sent shivers down her spine. She did not step back. Instead, she met his gaze with steady determination, silently offering her support. "You must let me help," she said, her voice firm. "You cannot face everything alone." Kaelin's eyes softened for a brief moment. He had spent his life ruling, fighting, and surviving alone. To allow someone to stand beside him, someone he had come to care for deeply, was not easy. Yet in Leora's unwavering gaze he saw trust, courage, and the bond that could no longer be denied. "Very well," he said finally, his voice low and deliberate. "But stay close. Danger will come faster than you expect." As the days passed, Kaelin and Leora moved together through the court and the palace, their partnership growing stronger. They trained together in the hidden courtyard, sparring with wooden swords and practicing defense, their movements precise and synchronized. Kaelin's power was unmatched, but Leora's intelligence and agility allowed her to keep pace, earning his admiration and deepening the bond between them. One night, as the moon rose high above the palace, Kaelin found Leora near the fountain again. The silver light reflected in her eyes, revealing a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "There is a darkness coming," Kaelin said, his voice low, almost a growl, "a threat that will not wait for our hesitation." Leora nodded, feeling the truth of his words resonate within her. "Then we face it together," she said, her voice steady yet carrying the weight of understanding. Kaelin's gaze softened as he stepped closer, the storm within him tempered by the bond growing between them. "Together," he repeated, a promise and a recognition of what neither could yet fully name. The night stretched on, the moon casting long shadows across the gardens. Somewhere beyond the walls, forces stirred, sensing the awakening bond between the savage Alpha and the Omega. They were not yet aware of the full extent of the danger approaching, nor of the trials that would test their courage, loyalty, and the strength of their connection. But Kaelin and Leora, standing together beneath the ancient trees in the silver moonlight, were beginning to understand. Fate had intertwined their paths, and though the storm ahead was uncertain, neither would face it alone. Cliffhanger. As they prepared to leave the gardens, a figure emerged from the shadows, a messenger bearing a warning written in blood-red ink. The words were simple yet chilling. "The bond awakens, and so does the hunt. Protect her, Alpha, or lose everything." The morning sun rose pale and fragile over Eldrath, casting long shadows across the marble floors of the royal court. Whispers filled the halls like wind through autumn leaves. Rumors of Kaelin and Leora's bond had spread faster than wildfire, and the nobles were unsettled. Some called it destiny, others called it a threat. Yet no one dared speak openly, for Kaelin's presence alone silenced the boldest tongues. Kaelin, however, was far from silent. He moved through the court with eyes sharp and alert, his mind never leaving Leora's side. Danger had always stalked him, but now it lurked closer, shadowed by politics and envy. The message delivered last night had set his instincts on fire. The bond between him and Leora had awakened, and someone or something was watching, waiting. Leora moved quietly through the hall, aware of the gazes and whispers. The noble's scrutiny made her chest tighten, but she refused to falter. She had survived Kaelin's wrath before, and now she stood beside him in purpose, if not yet fully in understanding. The bond between them was unspoken but undeniable, a thread of fate linking them in ways neither could ignore. The first confrontation came that very day. A faction of nobles, resentful of Kaelin's power and suspicious of Leora's influence, cornered them in the main hall. Their words dripped with venom. "You bring chaos to this court," one sneered. "This woman is no ordinary noble. She walks too freely, speaks too boldly. You, Kaelin, allow it, and for what? Personal desire? Distraction?" Kaelin's eyes darkened, a shadow of his inner storm visible in his gaze. "I allow nothing that threatens my people," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "She is here because she belongs. That is enough." Leora felt her pulse quicken. For the first time, she saw Kaelin not only as protector but as a force of will, unwavering and uncompromising. The tension in the room rose like a tide, threatening to drown anyone who dared speak further. "You claim destiny as your shield?" Another noble challenged, stepping forward. "Fate is a weak excuse for favoritism." Kaelin stepped closer to Leora, his presence like a living wall of shadow and strength. "Destiny cannot be denied," he said firmly. "And she is mine as I am hers. Anyone who challenges this bond will face consequences they cannot imagine." The court fell silent. Even the boldest noble sensed the truth in his words. This was no ordinary threat. This was the force of an alpha whose claim was absolute, whose bond with the Omega had shifted the balance of power itself. But danger rarely waits for understanding. That night, as the palace slept under a blanket of silver moonlight, shadows moved along the outer walls. Figures cloaked in darkness approached. Trained assassins sent by those who feared Kaelin's growing influence and the Omega's mysterious power. Their footsteps were silent, their intent clear. Kaelin sensed it immediately. His instincts flared and he rose from his chambers, moving with the silent power of a predator. Leora, already aware of his presence, followed close behind. The bond between them pulsed, invisible yet tangible, guiding them toward the threat before it could strike. The first assassin emerged from the shadows, a blade flashing in the moonlight. Kaelin moved like a shadow himself, intercepting with a strike so precise it sent the attacker sprawling. Leora did not flinch. Her agility allowed her to sidestep, her hands reaching for the nearest attacker to redirect him without harm. Together they moved with a rhythm neither had rehearsed but instinctively understood, their actions guided by the bond growing stronger with every heartbeat. Kaelin's dark eyes locked on the remaining intruders. "Do not harm her," he commanded. His words were not a request. They were law. Leora felt the weight of his protection, the fierce intensity of a man who had long been feared but now revealed a vulnerability only she could touch. As the last of the assassins fled into the night, Kaelin's hand rested briefly on Leora's shoulder. The touch was gentle yet charged with energy, an unspoken acknowledgement of their bond. She looked up at him, eyes wide, and saw the storm within him, a mixture of relief, frustration, and something deeper, something only the fated bond could create. "You are growing stronger," Kaelin said softly, almost to himself. "And so am I." Leora's breath caught. "Stronger? Because of each other?" she asked, the words trembling with wonder. Kaelin's gaze met hers, intense and unyielding. "Yes," he said, low and certain. "We are bound, Leora, by destiny, by choice, and by what the world does not yet understand." The following days were a careful balance of court politics and training. Kaelin ensured Leora was never left alone, yet he did not smother her. Their encounters were a mixture of subtle glances, quiet conversation, and moments of shared vigilance. Each interaction deepened the bond, strengthened their trust, and revealed layers of emotion neither had expected. One evening, the court called a feast to celebrate a new alliance, but tensions simmered beneath the laughter and music. The nobles' whispers hinted at rebellion, and Kaelin's eyes never left Leora. He could sense the unease, the hidden threats, the plans that moved in silence. She felt it too, the electricity of danger, the pull of their bond, and the certainty that they were stronger together. As the feast continued, a masked figure approached from the shadows, carrying a sealed letter. Kaelin intercepted silently, breaking the wax with a swift motion. The message inside was simple but chilling. The Omega walks in the shadow of death. Protect her or lose everything. Leora's hands trembled slightly as Kaelin handed the note to her. The words confirmed her fears. The bond between them had attracted forces beyond the court, beyond the kingdom. Their connection was a beacon, drawing attention and danger alike. Kaelin's eyes darkened. "You will not walk alone," he said. "Not now, not ever. The court, the shadows, the threats, they will not touch you while I breathe." Her gaze met his, filled with a mixture of gratitude, awe, and something deeper that neither could yet name. The court had turned against them. Assassins had come for them. And yet here they stood, together, unbroken, and united by a bond that defied logic and fear. The night outside grew colder, winds carrying the distant cries of creatures from the surrounding forests. Yet Leora and Kaelin remained in the garden, silent but connected. They knew the trials ahead would test them, that enemies lurked in every shadow, and that the court itself might attempt to sever the bond forming between them. Yet neither feared the storm, for they had found strength in each other. The Alpha's fierce protection and the Omega's quiet courage created a harmony that was more powerful than any weapon, more lasting than any decree, and in that silence, under the silver moonlight, Kaelin whispered a vow. "No one will take you from me. I will fight every shadow, every threat, every force in this world to keep you safe. You are mine, and I am yours." Leora's heart thumped in response. She had survived danger before, but never had she felt such certainty, such unwavering protection and trust. The fated bond between them was no longer a possibility. It was reality, a force that could not be denied. The court may have plotted, assassins may have struck, and whispers of rebellion may have grown louder. But in the quiet of the palace gardens, Kaelin and Leora stood united. The savage Alpha, feared by all, had found the Omega who would stand beside him, and together, they faced a world that would soon learn the true power of their bond. Cliffhanger. As they turned to leave the gardens, a sudden shadow fell over them. From the trees emerged a figure taller and darker than any assassin they had faced before, eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Kaelin's stance hardened instantly, and Leora felt the pull of destiny tighten around them. The next battle was approaching, and neither could predict who or what they would face. The palace lay in uneasy silence, the tension of days past thick in the air. Leora and Kaelin moved through the corridors like shadows, alert to every whisper, every shift of movement. The warning from the masked figure still burned in their minds. Danger was coming, a threat unlike any they had faced before. Kaelin's instincts were taut, his senses heightened, yet he did not falter. The savage Alpha, feared by all, had found in Leora a strength that matched his own. Their bond pulsed between them, invisible yet undeniable, and it guided every step they took. They were no longer simply Alpha and Omega. They were fated, intertwined by a force older and stronger than the court itself. By dusk, they reached the outer gardens, the moon rising like a guardian over the palace walls. Shadows moved unnaturally among the trees, and Kaelin's eyes, sharp and unrelenting, caught the glint of steel. The figure from the night before stepped forward, taller, stronger, and unlike any opponent they had met. His eyes glowed with a strange, unnatural light, and an aura of cold authority radiated from him. "You should not have come," the stranger said, voice deep and resonant, echoing unnaturally through the garden. "The bond awakens, and it will cost you everything." Kaelin stepped protectively in front of Leora, his hand brushing lightly against hers. The touch was both reassurance and claim, an unspoken promise that she would not face this threat alone. Leora's breath steadied. Fear was present, yes, but so was resolve. They would face whatever came together. The figure advanced, movements fluid and deliberate. Kaelin responded instantly, a storm of strength and precision. Steel clashed, echoes ringing through the garden as the stranger tested the Alpha's power. Leora moved beside him, agile and quick, using her knowledge of the terrain to anticipate threats, redirect blows, and defend where needed. Their movements were no longer separate. They flowed together like wind and water, instinct and purpose perfectly aligned. The battle raged, shadows twisting and light flickering across the marble paths. Kaelin's power was immense, yet the stranger matched him in strength and skill. Leora's courage and precision allowed her to find openings, creating space for Kaelin to strike with controlled fury. Their bond guided them, each aware of the other's movements without need for words, a silent communication stronger than any command. Finally, Kaelin found an opening. With a controlled strike, he disarmed the stranger, forcing him to the ground. But even in defeat, the figure's eyes glowed with defiance, and he whispered, "This is only the beginning." Before they could react, he vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a lingering chill and the echo of a threat yet unresolved. Kaelin's chest heaved as he turned to Leora. She met his gaze steadily, hands trembling slightly, but her eyes clear and unwavering. In that moment, he saw not just the Omega he had protected, but a partner, a companion who had faced danger and emerged unbroken. "You are incredible," Kaelin said, voice rough but filled with awe. I could not have faced that without you." Leora shook her head gently. "No," she said softly. "We faced it together, always together." For the first time, Kaelin allowed himself a small, almost vulnerable smile. The court, the threats, the shadows, all had tested them, but they had endured. And in that endurance, something deeper had emerged. Trust, respect, and the recognition of a bond that neither could ignore or deny. The following days brought both relief and continued vigilance. The court had quieted. Nobles wary of provoking the Alpha and the Omega, whose bond was no longer hidden. Yet the threats lingered, unseen forces moving in the shadows, testing the limits of their connection. Kaelin and Leora trained together, shared quiet moments of conversation, and allowed the trust between them to grow. One evening, under the pale light of a full moon, Kaelin and Leora found themselves in the ancient gardens once more. The fountains reflected the silver glow, and the shadows of the oak trees stretched long and protective across the paths. Kaelin stepped close to Leora, his presence enveloping her like a shield. "I have fought many battles," he said, voice low, "but none have mattered as much as this, the bond we share. You are my fated mate, Leora. I cannot deny it, nor would I want to." Leora's heart fluttered, a mixture of fear, awe, and hope. "And I am yours," she whispered, "not because of destiny alone, but because I choose it. I choose you." Their hands found each other, fingers interlacing, a physical confirmation of what their hearts had known. The bond was no longer a whisper or a pull. It was a living, breathing force that connected them, gave them strength, and promised protection. Then, a sudden movement in the shadows reminded them that their journey was not yet complete. A messenger arrived, breathless and urgent, with a note sealed in crimson wax. Kaelin broke it open, eyes scanning the words swiftly. The message was simple but chilling. "The court is not done. Forces beyond your understanding will rise. Protect each other or the bond will be severed." Kaelin's jaw tightened. He turned to Leora, eyes filled with determination and fierce devotion. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it together. No one will break this bond." Leora nodded, feeling the truth of his words resonate within her. The court, the shadows, the threats, they were all part of the world they now navigated as one. And together they were stronger than anything that dared oppose them. The night deepened and the palace seemed to exhale a quiet, protective energy. Kaelin and Leora walked through the garden side by side, hands still linked, their steps synchronized in perfect harmony. Every whisper, every glance, every moment of shared vigilance had brought them here, to a place of trust, understanding, and unshakable bond. They reached the ancient fountain, water sparkling under the moonlight. Kaelin rested his hand lightly on Leora's cheek, a gentle touch that contrasted with the storm of his usual intensity. "You are mine," he said softly, yet with the authority of the Alpha. "And I am yours. Always." Leora leaned into his hand, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "Always," she echoed, her voice a promise, a vow, and a recognition of the force that had brought them together. In that quiet moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The court, the threats, the shadows, all faded into insignificance against the strength of their bond. They were Alpha and Omega, fated mates, and together they had faced danger, fear, and uncertainty. And though the future remained uncertain, though challenges and enemies might rise again, they knew one thing beyond all doubt. They would face it together, bound by a bond that no shadow, no whisper, no threat could ever sever. Climactic moment. As they stood there, hand in hand, the distant sound of hooves echoed from the palace gates. Messengers arrived with word that an unknown army gathered beyond the northern forest, a threat to the kingdom itself. Kaelin's grip on Leora's hand tightened, their bond glowing with unspoken power. "Then we fight," he said, "together. Whatever comes, we are stronger as one." The moon shone down on the garden, silver light reflecting in their eyes, a silent witness to the beginning of a new chapter. The savage Alpha and his Omega, bound by destiny and choice, were ready to face the world, together, unbroken and unstoppable. Ending cliffhanger, resolution. The fated bond had awakened fully, tested in shadow and steel and proven unbreakable. Yet as the distant horizon hinted at a storm of armies and trials, Kaelin and Leora knew that their story was only beginning. Together they would redefine strength, courage, and love, not as separate forces but as a single unstoppable power that could face any darkness the world dared to cast upon them.